Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to another bookish breakfast. So at the end of my second video last week I mentioned that I've reached 500 subscribers, which is lovely, and I wanted to do a tag to kind of recognise that, and the lovely Jo Smith recommended that I could try the favourite writers tag. I've always been quite reluctant to name my favourites. If anyone saw the favourite books tag that I did, I kind of tried my best to avoid actually saying which books were my favourite. But I think one of the things that I have got from being on BookTube is a bit more confidence talking about what books I like and why I like them. And I've become a little bit more like comfortable saying books that are favourites for me. So the favourite writers tag was initially came from a video created by somebody called Alex at What Page Are You On? And then Steve Donoghue decided to turn it into a tag because why not? So what you have to do is you have to name 6 not quites that are not quite your favourite, 4 maybes that are like maybe nearly your favourite, and then 5 actual like solid favourites. And I know I just said that I'm a little bit more confident naming favourites, but yeah, I struggled, particularly with the not quites. My 5 favourites I'm pretty like fixed with. I don't think I would see a lot of variation in those, but the not quites were difficult. So I set a couple of extra rules for myself. Firstly, I had to have read more than one book by that author, ideally more than 2 books if they've written a lot of books. And that ruled out people like George Eliot, who I'm pretty sure one day she'll be in the top 15, but at the moment I've only read 1 book by her. And I also, for my top 5, I said that I had to have never read a bad book by them. So that was some of the ground rules that I had setting out. So I'm going to try and keep this not too insanely rambly, so I'm going to just dive straight in. So yeah, like I said, I struggled with the not quites. So there were 2 people who nearly made it onto the not quite list, and in the end the only reason that they didn't was because I didn't physically have any copies of books by them to hold up. So that was Oscar Wilde and Anne Bronte, and they are both authors that I really, really like, but they just, if I don't have them on my shelves, then that's probably an indicator that maybe I don't, it's not like I see a book by them and think, oh, I've got to have that because I need to have them on my shelves. So yeah, they possibly could make it one day, but they're just outside of the the list. So I've just realised that I left some of the books that I need to hold up right over there, so I'm just going to reach over. Because my number 1 not quite is William Shakespeare. This is my insanely ugly complete works that is really difficult to read. I'm gradually trying to replace it with individual copies, but this is the easiest one to hold up. So William Shakespeare is a not quite because he is, you know, such a high quality of writing in the majority of his plays, but there are a few that are, I guess, duds, and one of the things that we got from ShakeTube this year is that some of them are not absolutely perfect. And the other thing that I tried to rate people on was like reading experience, and I think the reading experience of a Shakespeare play is generally not that great, and it's something that you are better off seeing performed. Whereas if you compare that to Oscar Wilde, for example, if you read The Importance of Being Earnest, it's almost as hysterical as it is when you see it in the flesh. But with Shakespeare, if there's a comedy scene, it really takes the performance of it to bring out the comedy in it. So yeah, Shakespeare's a bit of a not quite, but still really up there with authors that I would not want the world to be without. So next on the list for not quite is going to be Agatha Christie. Got a selection of Agatha Christie books here. Most of which I've picked up in secondhand bookshops, as you can see by the big stickers all over them. So Agatha Christie, again, she's quite patchy. There are books that you read by Christie that you just, they don't really do that much for you, like Evil Under the Sun. I definitely wouldn't recommend this as a first one to read. But some of them are phenomenal and absolutely brilliant, like A Pocket Full of Rye. This is a brilliant, brilliant detective story. And for me, Agatha Christie is something that I can always turn to when I'm feeling a little bit down, a little bit overwhelmed, and I can read one in an afternoon and it will just kind of give me a little bit of excitement back and give me a little bit of energy and enthusiasm over something, even though it's just a made-up murder case that happened 60 years ago. So I really appreciate the coziness of Agatha Christie and how, you know, how one of her books can kind of give me a real boost. So, next on the Not Quites. So a couple of the ones that made it into the Not Quites were almost as much for kind of sentimental reasons as anything else. So this is Pigeon Post by Arthur Ransome, and I do have the full set, but I picked this one because it was one of my favourites, and also it's one that looks least likely to fall apart. I think these were my dad's copies originally. Oh no, Ros Carter, that's my mum. She's even written 5 of 9, so that, you know, you can't get confused on the order. I think my dad had a hardback one. But basically these are children's stories written around the time of the Second World War. I think the kid's dad is away fighting, so it's a group of 4 siblings who just create their own adventures in the Lake District. And the series is so wonderful because it's like the Chronicles of Narnia in that it's a group of siblings having a magical, wonderful experience and kind of learning a lot and kind of maturing over the course of their holidays and so on. But everything that happens could happen in Arthur Ransome. They don't open the door and go into a magical world. They create their own magical world, and I really love that. And I'm really looking forward to having a child to be able to share these adventures with. And there's so many happy memories for me associated with these books where my brother and I would like go on our own little adventures, or our parents were trying to like recreate some of the fun that these kids had by taking us on trips to the Lake District and so on. So yeah, these are kind of like emotionally important to me. I don't know how good the actual quality of the writing is because it's been a while since I reread them, but the story and the plot is just lovely. But it is like 1940s, 1930s English writing, so yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing it with my kids, but it's also going to start some conversations on like which games is it appropriate to play and what names is it appropriate to call people and things like that. Next I have got Margaret Atwood. So I'd say The Handmaid's Tale is one of my most commonly recommended books, and it's a book that I can recommend to nearly anyone because it's very like broad in its appeal, and I recommend it to people who only really like reading modern stuff. I recommend it to people who like classics. I recommend it to people who like fantasy and sci-fi. I recommend it to people who like more kind of feminist books. And I just recommend it because I really, really liked it. I've only read it the once, and I do want to reread it. So Bo read it this year via audiobook. So when I finish The Lord of the Rings on audiobook, I think I'm going to re-listen to this one just to have that experience again because I really enjoyed it. Then earlier this year, I read Stone Mattress, which is a collection of short stories, some of which are slightly interlinked. And yeah, it just reminded me just how brilliant her writing is in terms of just the quality of it. And both of these books are kind of linked with, I read them both while I was on holidays, on specific trips, so they've got like other associations as well that are quite happy, or I guess positive and interesting associations as well. So yeah, that's Margaret Atwood. Then next we have got, how many authors have I done there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh no, I've actually got 7 for the Not Quite. Okay, the other Not Quite that's going to be relegated then is Graham Greene. So Graham Greene is not going to make it onto the Not Quites. So I've read 2 books by him, and he wrote a lot of books, so I haven't really covered enough of his kind of work to claim him as a favourite. But this is Brightman Rock. I've also read The Power and the Glory, and I do just think that the quality of his writing and the way that his plots kind of draw you in are very effective. But yeah, I picked one too many people. So skipping ahead then, back onto the people who did make it onto the Not Quite, I've got Charles Dickens. So I read Our Mutual Friend for Victober this year and Oliver Twist for Victober last year. I've also read Great Expectations and quite a few of the short stories. I think I have them over there, but I can't reach them. So very little in the context of the amount that Dickens has written. But always there's things that make me really laugh, there's things that make me think, there are just phenomenal characters. Nobody creates characters like Dickens does. And I just really love a long meandering story, and that is what Dickens does best. So I've always found them very, very, excuse me, sorry, very, very enjoyable works. So that's Dickens. And then the final favourite, not quite, is another nostalgic one, and that's Frances Hodgson Burnett. And The Secret Garden, and in particular A Little Princess, which for some reason I don't have a copy of. Just such wonderful books for a young girl to read, and A Little Princess in particular got me through so many sad times when I was little. Times when I was sad about things I shouldn't really have been sad about, the things that kids get sad about, like losing a toy or whatever. Turning to A Little Princess just pushed me through it all, because the main character has just got this wonderful resilience, and she was such a good role model, even though when I read it now I kind of see these kind of like difficult aspects related to like class and gender dynamics and so on. It's just so sweet and so cute and so lovely and so inspiring, that I have to put her as a favourite. So moving on to the maybes, I've got 4 maybes. I think I'm going to just start with the stuff that's on the top of the pile and working down the pile. So I'm taking a drink from my mug, which has got, if you can see it in enough detail, this is the One Ring kind of motif from Tolkien, because first of the maybes is Tolkien. So we've got all of them with the older covers, because the older covers are the best covers. And even though I said last week that I was re-listening to The Fellowship of the Ring and finding it a little bit less good than I remembered, it did really pick up. I finished it this week, and I loved it, and it immediately just, by the time I got to the end of it, I was really loving the world again, and just the scope that Tolkien was able to create over the course of his life. The entire world that is the Lord of the Rings, the entire, like, the creation of Middle Earth and all of the things that go with that, it's just so impressive. And just the ability that he had as an author to do that, I love it. I've been to the Tolkien Maker of Middle Earth exhibition a couple of years ago, I think, or a year or so ago, at the Bodleian Library. And they had quite a few excerpts of other things that he'd written, and while we were there, like, we spent a long time there, and I read like bits of his translations of Old English texts and so on, and all of them had the same level of quality of writing. He just really has the knack for that kind of archaic, mythopoeic kind of, like, the writing, the kind of old legendary style. And it was all just really good quality. Even though I don't own that as a physical book, the bits that I read while I was in the exhibition, I was really engaged with. So Tolkien had to be on the list somewhere. This is quite battered. It belonged to Beau, and I was reading it, I think about 2 years ago. I reread the whole set, and I've just taped it together with my kind of work tape. I think it must have fallen apart while I was at work. So I had to tape it back together. So let me just pop those, kind of hemming myself in with piles of books. So next I have got Charlotte Bronte. And Beau was quite surprised when I told him of this list that Charlotte Bronte didn't make it into the top 5. But like I said at the start, to get into the top 5, I had to have never read a bad book by that author. And it would be putting it strongly to say that it's a bad book. I really enjoyed Villette the first time I read it, but I was a bit let down by the ending. I thought it was a bit disappointing. And then I reread it about 2 years ago, and I was less bothered by the ending, but I found that there were whole pages that just didn't really do anything for me, that I kind of just felt like, this is a bit excessive, or this is not moving, this is not taking me anywhere. And because of that, it's just a weaker book, I think. Then obviously Jane Eyre is one of my favourite books ever. It's really quite high up the top of the list. And I've really enjoyed the Tales of Angria as well. I've read quite a lot of those, and they are the kind of the made-up world that she created, particularly I think with Bramwell. so yeah, I really love most of what she's written. Shirley, I really enjoyed as well, but I've just never felt the urge to reread it just yet. So again, like she's got a couple of things that are excellent, but a couple of things that just aren't quite at that top caliber to get into the top 5. Yeah, so what I was looking for my top 5 was like consistency, I suppose. Yeah, I still absolutely love her, and again, you know, really value her as an author. Then the next one, so I picked up kind of like, I've got too many books by this author to hold them all up. So I picked like the first of each series basically, and it's Philip Pullman. So I've got Grim Tales for Young and Old, which is his retelling of some fairy tales. I haven't actually finished this. I really love the cover. It's a really nice atmospheric cover. Then The Ruby and the Smoke, which is the Sally Lockhart series. I love this as a kind of like young teenager, I think maybe 10, 11, 12. This series was really like, it kind of had this great plot that really pulled you along and really dramatic and great fun. And I didn't even realise that it was the same author when it came to Northern Lights. I didn't realise that the author who wrote this also wrote this, because I loved this book, but it's so different from this book that I didn't really think that, I didn't relate the two together. And I love that he was able to write two things that I loved so much in such different ways. So yeah, the other thing he wrote was Northern Lights, and then I've also got Once Upon a Time in the North, which is like a little kind of mini prequel to Northern Lights, and then I've got The Book of Dust, and I haven't yet read, I've read the book La Belle Sauvage, I haven't yet read The Secret Commonwealth. Bo just finished it like 2 days ago, I think, and he spoke very highly of it, so I'm looking forward to reading that. But these books, it's not just about how good the books are, it's about what they mean to me and Bo, because it's a love that we both share. Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe, but I just think they're such like earth-shaking books. They really, really just make you think and question, and yeah, they do an excellent job for what they do. Yeah. So, I feel like I'm insufficiently eloquent to talk about my love for these books, and I'm just kind of like rambling through and saying, yes, I like them. But yeah, I just don't have the words sometimes. So the final author on the maybes list is Daphne du Maurier, and this box set was bought for me by my grandma, my dad's stepmom, when we went on a family holiday together to Umbria in Italy, and where is it? The Flight of the Falcon is set there, and she kind of wanted me to read this, and I did read it. But I think at the time I must have been about 11, and I did struggle with it, and I didn't enjoy it all that much. And then she bought me this whole box set, and she was like, oh, because I think I told her, oh, you know, I really liked it, because I didn't want to tell her that I didn't like the book that she told me to read. So she bought me this whole box set, and I was like, oh no, she's got me all these books by this author that I didn't really like. And it just sat on my shelves for several years, and I didn't read any of it. And then at a certain point, I think it was Frenchman's Creek, I read, and it's such a powerful book. And Frenchman's Creek, I'll Never Be Young Again, these books really broke me. They're so sad, but so powerful at the same time. It's this kind of like urgent nostalgia, this kind of like, you can't quite get to where you want to be, you can't quite do the things you want to do, and I'm scared to reread them because I think they would have me in floods of tears, and I think that's a sign of a good author, that they're able to do that. And then you've got other books by her like Rebecca and Jamaica Inn, where's Jamaica Inn there, that are just more about like the atmosphere and the mystery and the drama, and they're just really good. So I think Daphne du Maurier would be in my top 5 if it weren't for the fact that last year I read Castle Door, which is right down at the bottom here, and this is actually, I think it's she co-authored it, she finished it for somebody who's passed away, I think, and it did nothing for me, and I was really disappointed in it. So the disappointment that I had in Castle Door actually kind of brought my whole feelings about Daphne du Maurier down a little bit. But I still, those particular books are still I love them so much. Yeah, and there's also some short stories. The Rendezvous and other stories, it's completely bleached by the sun. And those are really great. And so is Julius. And so is The Parasites. And so is, like, obviously Rebecca. Like, every book in here, apart from Castle Door, and I still haven't reread The Flight of the Falcon. They're just great. Anyway. 20 minutes, I'm not doing too badly. I was worried it would be like 40 minutes long. So now we get to the top 5, and these are pretty, like, it would be pretty hard to change my opinion on these. But I'll put to the bottom the one who I've read the least by, and that is Thomas Hardy. These really nice cloth-bound editions that Ros got for me, which have all got these kind of like straw man figures, and then they've got, sorry, not managing to hold these, lovely woodcut illustrations on the inside. Let's see. So, oh, I won't, that's a spoiler, that picture's a spoiler. Yeah, it's really characteristic pictures. Yeah, so Thomas Hardy, I have read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Far From That in Crowd, and The Return of the Native, and I read some of his poetry as well, but I know that that is very little in the scope of what he wrote, the same as with Dickens, maybe not quite so bad as with Dickens, but I need to read a lot more before I kind of know that he has got that consistency. But the books that I've read by him, I just love them so much. And I think they are books that are pretty much infinitely rereadable. They've got enough content, enough good quality in the writing, and enough themes and character development that you could keep reading them and keep getting more stuff out of them. Which to me is really important in making a favourite book, is that you can keep going back to it. So yeah, so I love Thomas Hardy, and particular Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I mean, I reread it recently and talked about it quite a bit. It's just such a fantastic book. And then his other books, he writes a really good female character, and he writes female characters with a lot of depth and interest in an era when male authors were really not very good at that. So I appreciate that, and I like the way that he writes about like the rural setting and the way that he describes that. It's just so, yeah, it's great. So there we go, Thomas Hardy. Then the next one, I don't have anything to hold up for this one. I do actually have a lot of his shorter works photocopied in a folder upstairs because I studied them at college and I just never threw them away, but I don't have a physical book for him, and that's George Orwell, and I feel like I really should do. Oh, sugar, I think I do actually have 1984, and I just forgot to look for it because I just thought that I didn't have it. Okay, sorry about that. So George Orwell, so I've read Homage to Catalonia, I've read Down and Out in Paris and London, I've read 1984 and Animal Farm, and quite a few of his shorter essays, and he is one author who, whether he's writing fiction or non-fiction, the quality of his prose is pretty much the standard that I set, that other authors have to live up to. He just has that amazing clarity and that ability to just, it's like the famous quote from him, good prose is like a window pane. You don't know that it's there, you are just into whatever he's telling you. You don't really notice the way that he's taking you there, because the way that he's doing it is just, it's just perfect. It doesn't draw attention to itself, it just draws you into the story. And even the things that, like, Homage to Catalonia, for instance, it's got a whole section in the middle of it that was only relevant for a very short amount of time in the 1930s, which is a very detailed political description of the ongoing conflict in the Spanish Civil War. So it's only of interest if you are either a historian or you were alive at that time and wanted to work out what the hell was going on in the Spanish Civil War. that is quite hard to read, but even with the difficulty of reading that, he still managed to make me want to finish the book. So I think that's quite a strong marker. And everything outside of that little area that is, he wrote that for a very specific reason. Everything outside of that is very, very readable and very, very engaging. And I know that some people say that people who write kind of allegorically or write with a political purpose in mind, that is somehow a lesser thing to do, but I really don't think so. And I really appreciate the way that Orwell's work can make people who even aren't very interested in politics become infuriated with the way that a system is working, because they will read a book like Animal Farm and become really angry and become really moved about politics, and I really like that he's able to do that. So highly rate George Orwell. Then next I've got Virginia Woolf. So I've got To the Lighthouse, and then I've got A Woman's Essays and A Room of One's Own. And again, very much like George Orwell, when it comes to her non-fiction, the prose is like impeccable, and it in the way that it's like it almost isn't there, and it just takes you straight to the idea and straight to the soul of her point. And it's really hard to disagree with her. She so summarizes my own opinions a lot of the time. It's like she says things that I would like to say with perfect eloquence when it comes to her non-fiction. But then when it comes to her fiction, the way that she writes, it's completely innovative for the time, and it's just amazing. And just like the characters that she has, and the stories that she has. I wouldn't say plots, because they're not really plot-driven works, but just the way that she creates a tale, it's brilliant. And I would love to read more by her. I've read also, as well as these, I've read Orlando and Mrs. Dalloway. Mrs. Dalloway is a really excellent book. I really enjoy it. One of my friends at work is reading To the Lighthouse at the moment, and it's one of those where every time I see her, it's like, how are you doing with that? How are you doing with it? And she's not reading it as fast as like I want her to be reading it, so that I can talk to her about it more. But yeah, so that's Virginia Woolf. And then the next author is one that probably all of these authors are very well known. I don't think I've really mentioned anybody who's not very, very known and recognised. Apart from, I think this one is far less known, and this is Rosamund Lehmann. I've talked about her before on my channel, and she, I think I filmed a very long review of this book, A Note in Music. Then I've also got Invitation to the Waltz. I think I put that as one of my favourite books. And then The Gypsy's Baby is a collection of short stories, and she is a 1920s, 1930s. Look at that, that's so cute. This book used to be owned by Nicola McCaffrey, and she liked cats. 1930s, 1928, So she's a 1930s British female writer who writes incredibly moving stories about, particularly about young women and their position in society as women, and the way that they interact with the people around them, and topics like coming of age, or dealing with love and marriage, and when marriage isn't maybe quite as perfect as it should be, or when your social expectations aren't met, or when your emotional expectations aren't met. She just writes phenomenal books about the ways that people relate to each other. And I would definitely recommend Rosamund Lehmann to anyone who is a lover of female authors. Particularly if you like Virginia Woolf, I think you would also like Rosamund Lehmann. And then the final author, it's got to be the most obvious, because how could she possibly not be on here at the top of the pile? It's Jane Austen. And I've read nearly everything that Jane Austen has written, apart from her letters. The only thing I haven't read by Jane Austen is her letters and a play that she once wrote that was an adaptation of Sir Charles Grandison. I have voluntarily taken time out of my time off to study her books. I have read all of these multiple times. I've read her Juvenilia multiple times, and I just always love I just always love everything that there is to love about Jane Austen. And I know that she's an obvious person to love, but she's an obvious person to love because she is so good, and yeah, nobody else writes quite like her. And yeah, I mean, if you love Jane Austen, then you know why I love Jane Austen. I don't need to explain myself, but yeah, it's got to be said. She's amazing. Yeah, and this is the beautiful box set that both got for me for Valentine's Day, I think a couple of years ago. So yeah, so those were approximately 15 of my favourite writers. So thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry it's such a long video, and I hope that some of it at least has been coherent, and if I've inspired you to try a different author, then let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to give like specific book recommendations, or if you like or dislike any of these authors, yeah, talk to me about it. It would be great to talk a bit more, because they're all people that I would love to discuss. Okay, have a lovely week. See you later.